You already know what I'm about to say. I hope you all studied for your vocab quiz. I hope you found it to your liking and that it wasn't too hard for you. Now we're going to move on. Chapter 2, the spread of civilization, and in particular, Section 4, the rise of China. As in other regions, China's early civilizations followed the spread of agriculture along river valleys. As most of the rivers in China flow east to the Pacific Ocean, China's civilizations developed near the east coast. All right, so let's look now at our traditional name for China, bell ringer. The traditional name for China is called the Middle Kingdom. This is the English translation of the traditional Chinese name for China. We're going to reflect on some possible reasons why the Chinese chose this name for their country. Then we're going to decide which of the following factors might have most influenced their choice. So here first we have that the Chinese thought that China should avoid contact with other countries. The Chinese viewed China as the center of the civilized world, and the Chinese believed that the emperor was the most powerful monarch. So what does all this mean? Well, choice B contributed the most to the name Middle Kingdom. Natural geographic barriers left China largely isolated from its neighbors. Throughout the history of China, however, nomads from the northern steppes would periodically invade the settled farming communities in China. The Chinese viewed these nomads as barbarians. Soon the term barbarian was applied generally to a people of non-Chinese culture. Consequently, the Chinese developed the ideal that China was the center of the civilized world and so came to use the name Middle Kingdom for China. So in other words, this name Middle Kingdom is transcendent. It is not only speaking that China is the geographic center or middle of the civilized world, but is also thematically the center of civilization. The Chinese believed that their emperor was the most powerful monarch. They knew of other monarchs around them, sure they did, but they felt that theirs was the most powerful and therefore should be put at the middle. They believed that China was the center of the civilized world. Were there other civilizations out there? Sure there was, and they were aware of them. But they felt that theirs was so far advanced that they were the middle or the center of the civilized world. And they thought that they should avoid contact with other countries. And they wanted to put themselves in the center and isolate themselves from everyone else. And this was easy to do because of the natural geographic barriers that China had, and later on the Great Wall of China that they built to keep the Mongols and the barbarians out. Now let's think about that again, where they actually said that a barbarian is anyone who is not of Chinese descent, who is not of the Chinese culture. That is how highly they regarded their culture, was that we're so great that anything that is not us is barbaric. So this name Middle Kingdom carried a lot of weight for the Chinese. This was not just something they threw around lightly. Let's talk now about the impact of the geography of China. Arable land meant that China had thousands of miles of fertile food-producing land along its two main rivers, the Yangtze and the Changjiang. Only about 10% of China's land is suitable for farming. However, much of the remaining land consists of mountains and deserts. Now, this 10% of Chinese land, that's still a lot of land because China covers a lot of area. Geographic isolation and the northern frontier. Mountains and deserts form natural boundaries with neighboring countries, and this isolated the Chinese from other peoples in Asia. So already their geography is starting to impact their philosophy. It's very easy to adopt this isolationist policy when your country is already naturally barriered off. There was contact with Mongolian and Indo-European and Turkish peoples in the frontier lands to the north, and it's often ended in conflict, especially with the Mongols. So this is one of the reasons why we see that China invests so much time, effort, and money into building the Great Wall to the north, is to keep the Mongols, the Indo-Europeans, and even the Turkish people out. China also had a varied climate. The climate variations are based on land elevation. So different elevations of land you get in China, you're going to get deserts. In low areas, you'll get areas of mountainous snow in high areas. There's dry and wet seasons. These create major temperature differences in winter and summer. Here's a map of China. This is a digital satellite image of China, and we're going to talk about the land masses in different areas that make up China's area. Now, the first thing you see right off the bat are these green areas towards the coast. These are your most fertile areas. And then as you move east, you'll start to see, as you move west, you'll start to see more brown, which is your deserts and your mountainous areas. This image is a satellite view of Earth that uses color enhancing to show China and its borders. About 10% of China's land is suitable for agriculture. Much of the rest of the land consists of mountains and deserts that ring China on its northern and western frontiers. The Gobi Desert in China includes the southern part of the Gobi Desert. In July, average highs can reach 113 degrees Fahrenheit, and in January, average lows can reach 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's a big disparity, a huge high end and a very different low end for a desert because of where it's located geographically. The Tian Shan Mountains. This mountain reaches up to 22,000 feet in the Alpine regions. Temperatures have been recorded as low as minus 58 degrees. That's cold. The Taklamakan Desert. It extends for about 600 miles from west to east and has a maximum width of about 260 miles. During the summer, the temperatures can reach as high as 100 degrees, and during the winter, it can reach as low as 4 degrees. So these are natural barriers from invasion. Nobody wants to cross this desert when it's 100 degrees, there's no water. Nobody wants to cross this desert in the winter when it's 4 degrees and it's freezing cold. So China already has these natural barriers to the north and to its west, and then of course the ocean to its east and southeast. So it was very easy for them to adopt this policy of Middle Kingdom. We're going to isolate ourselves from everyone. We want to talk now about the Shang dynasty. These dynasties were periods of time ruled by certain families, and that's how China classifies their dynasties: the Shang dynasty, the Ming dynasty, the Qing dynasty. We're going to talk now about the Shang dynasty. The main thing to understand is that farming and warfare characterized the Shang society. The Shang dynasty ruled China from about 1750 to 1045 BC, and it was an aristocracy, which meant the Shang society was based primarily on farming. The king and aristocracy were concerned mainly with warfare. The political and social structure was set up so that the kingdom was divided into territories ruled by aristocratic military leaders called warlords. The king appointed these leaders. Though the majority of people were peasants, there were some artisans, merchants, and slaves during the Shang dynasty. Under the Shang dynasty, there was religion and culture, a belief in supernatural forces that helped royalty and life after death was common. Communication with deities was done through oracle bones. If you've ever seen the movie 300 and where Leonidas goes up into the mountains and he talks to the oracle, and they're in that cave and they're breathing in the methane gas. Well, this was their way. Their similar way of talking to the deities was through these oracle bones that they would use, and they would interpret them and read them, much like reading tarot cards. The Shang artisans were masters of bronze casting, not broadcasting with Father Tony, bronze casting. All right, so that's the Shang dynasty. We're going to take a look in just a second at some Shang art and different things. But right now, the thing to understand and to most connect with the Shang dynasty is that farming and warfare were the two main things that characterized the Shang dynasty. So here is a sculpture from the Shang dynasty. This image shows a bronze zun, or wine vessel, which was made during the Shang dynasty. A crouching tiger and phoenix head decorate the tip of the elephant's trunk. The patterns on this zun's surface include a cloud and thunder design and Kui and ogre mask and designs. Shang bronzes were cast by using fired clay sectional molds. So what they did was they used clay. They would make these molds. They would fire cast them in sections, and then they would put it together to make the finished product. This is very detailed, very ornate, very, very artistic work right here from the Shang dynasty. This is a very pretty piece. So here we have a discussion question on the Shang dynasty. Why were government and social structures important to early Chinese dynasties? Think about that for a second. Find an answer for yourself on your own, like I always like you to do, and we'll discuss it briefly when we come back. Our question is, why were government and social structures important to early Chinese dynasties? Well, possible answers, if you may suggest, that they help to bring stability and allow for growth and progress. Now we're going to talk about the Zhou dynasty. A ZH is pronounced Zhou. The Zhou dynasty ruled from 1045 to 256 BC and was the longest lasting dynasty in Chinese history. As in the Shang dynasty, the Zhou king ruled over the government, and the kingdom was divided into territories governed by appointed officials. The Zhou king was considered a link between heaven and earth. By virtue of the mandate of heaven, the king held authority to command. And we're going to talk about this mandate of heaven. Under the mandate, kings were expected to rule with goodness and efficiency, following the Tao, or way of proper behavior in Confucianism, to protect the country from disasters. We're also going to talk about Tao briefly today. Now, the main point of emphasis to take away from the Zhou dynasty is this. They use the ideal of the mandate of heaven to justify their rule. They also have what is called a dynastic cycle in ancient China. We're going to look at that in just a second. This dynastic cycle is a lot like the revolutionary cycle that I was talking about early on in class. And we're going to get to touch on that, which will help us carry over later on into some of our own revolutions that we see in Americas, the French, and in other areas. Continuing on with the Zhou dynasty, the way it was set up, territories that had become powerful states eventually challenged Zhou rule. The period of civil war that broke out in 403 BC is known as the period of the warring states. By the end of the Zhou period, iron weapons have replaced bronze weapons, and soldiers on horseback carried powerful crossbows. Now, this is the Zhou dynasty. And once again, we want to know that there is a dynastic cycle, that there's a mandate of heaven, a political system. They follow the Tao, or the way, under the Confucianism principles, and that they did have military technology. Now, there's the most important thing of the Zhou dynasty to remember is this. It's not your mama. Get it, Joe mama? I'm here all night. Okay, so here's our dynastic cycle in ancient China. What we want to do is to fill in the blanks in this cycle. So what we have is a new dynasty. It comes in and it restores order. And we want to know how they restore order. Then we're going to go as this dynasty ages and it loses control over its officials. What are some of the things that could happen as it loses control over its officials? And then as this dynasty gets into its old years, the old dynasty, they displease heaven, and this results in floods or famine. Now, what we want to do is fill in the information on this chart. What happens when a dynasty comes in and restores order, loses control, and then displeases the mandate of heaven? Take a few seconds to think about that, come up with a couple of answers, and we'll talk about it in just a second. Okay, so we want to fill in this chart. Well, if you'll just hit the answer button right there, it'll pop up for you. Go ahead and click that and get the answer. It's right there. That's not really a button. I'm fooling with you. You're probably starting, stopping, and pausing your video. That's not really a button, but here's your answer. When they restore order, they protect people from invaders, rebuild infrastructure, walls, canals, irrigation systems. They expand the influence on trade. So these are all the things that happen. And this is just like when a new president comes in our country, and he does all these new and great things, and he's got all these plans that are going to help our country to be great again. And then as you get about into the second, third year, the aging dynasty stops providing good government, overtaxes the population, allows the infrastructure to decline, treats the people unfairly. Again, this is the power corrupting. This is the absolute power corrupting, absolutely corrupting the leaders. And then as the dynasty becomes old, they lose the mandate of heaven, and allows lawlessness and corruption, unable to defend against invaders or revolts. And then they're tossed out. They are replaced with someone else, and the dynastic cycle starts again. This dynastic cycle is the same as a revolution, as a dictatorial cycle, a revolutionary cycle. Again, if you can predict the past because of patterns, you can then predict the future. Okay, so this is the dynastic cycle. Yes, it is important for you to know this for testing purposes. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the dynastic cycle in ancient China. All right, so here we have a chart that shows our different dynasties is blanked out. It does show the dates that those dynasties did rule, and it shows those accomplishments, the accomplishments of each dynasty on the far right. So if nothing else, we ought to be able to go through and look at the dates and fill in which dynasties did these things. This will be mildly important to you. I'm not going to tell you specifically, but I would like for you to know this for your testing purposes. So we want to look at is what dynasty was the first dynasty. Organized government. They had writing, and they used bronze. Secondly, we want to look at which dynasty established the mandate of heaven and its importance of family, classical arts, discovery of silk. They used Taoism, Confucianism, and legalism. And we want to look at which dynasty united China, and they had measurements and writing standardized as far as education. And then finally, which dynasty had the extension of the empire, created the Silk Road, had civil service, the invention of paper, and Buddhism. I'm going to wait for you. I'd like for you to find these answers on your own. Don't do this with me. Don't sit there and wait for me to go on with the answers. Open your book, gain some knowledge on your own. When we come back, we'll look at the answers. Okay, so here's our answer. The Shang dynasty was the first dynasty to have an organized government, writing and using bronze. The Zhou dynasty established the mandate of heaven. They emphasized the importance of family. Classical arts, they discovered silk. They used Taoism, Confucianism, and legalism, which we'll talk about later when we do our discussion group. In the Qing dynasty, China was united, and they used measurements, and writing became standardized. And the Han dynasty, they extended the empire. They created the Silk Road, civil service, the invention of paper, and Buddhism. So we'll talk more in depth about these different dynasties when we have our discussion day. It's coming up very soon. So don't worry, we'll go in depth on these subjects. Now we want to talk about the traditional Chinese family under the Zhou dynasty. How we want to look at how the society was set up for these people. So the father was the authority figure. The authority rested with him, with the eldest male member of the family. As a result, the father had supreme authority. Everyone deferred to him. The relationship of a father to the son. The relationship between a father and his son was the most important. The elder son took control of the family after the father died. The relationship of a husband to his wife. This relationship was not as important as the father-son relationship. In fact, a husband could divorce his wife if she failed to give him sons. The elder brother to the younger brother. The younger brother should show respect to the elder brother. And for daughters, the daughters were not valued in the Chinese family. Indeed, in some cases, daughters were killed at birth because they were considered to be useless. Tragic. Now let's talk about the Shang dynasty just a little bit. These are some Shang characters of writing. The earliest Chinese writing was in the form of pictographs etched into cattle bones and turtle shells. These characters were probably written in red or black ink. Then a sharp instrument was used to carve the characters into the bone or shell. After this, the material was heated, which created cracks. These objects were called oracle bones because the ancient Chinese used them to attempt to foretell the future. The cracks caused by the heating formed a pattern, which was interpreted as a way to make predictions about upcoming events. The events included weather, harvest, and sickness. In 1899, scholars noticed that Chinese pharmacists were selling dragon bones, which were etched with ancient pictographs. The pharmacists claimed that the bones could be used for medical purposes. Eventually, scholars traced the bones to a site near Anyang. Excavation of the site uncovered about 100,000 oracle bones. So this is just a little insight into the culture of the Shang dynasty, how they lived, what they believed in. This is just to give you some background information on the Shang dynasty in general. Let's review now. Chapter 2, Lesson 4, The Rise of China. The geography of China allowed its leaders to adapt a policy of isolationism. China, like all dictatorial societies, experienced its own dynastic cycle. And after the Bronze Age, China adapted iron as the metal of choice for weapons and tools. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, be sure to email me, hit the Q&A board. Be sure that you're doing your guided reading activities for each lesson. They're due at midnight, and you know the late policy. Make sure you're getting your vocab activity taken care of. There is a quiz tomorrow, as there is a 5th section of this chapter. Study for it, take it, and pass it. If there's anything that you need of me, feel free to ask in class. I'm here for you. If there's nothing else, y'all have a good day. See you tomorrow.